Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm the Purple Sharpie, but you can call me Sharpie if you're feeling especially curious today. I'm here with a team from Sondering Studios. I have Emily, who is the writer. How are you doing today, Emily?
I am super excited to talk about this game and excited that we're also a part of this expo.
I'm excited that you're excited that you're here, for one, for all. I have Julia, who is the artist on the team. How are you doing today, Julia?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be a part of this.
Everyone's so excited to be a part of this. I love this. I love this so much. I have Caroline, who is the artist and a UI designer for the team.
I'm also very excited, but kind of nervous. Yeah.
It's 3 for 3 on excited right now, if you're counting at home, team. And last but not least, we have Kaio, who is the composer and sound designer of the team. How are you doing today, Kaio?
Oh, very, very excited to be here. Very, very nervous. You can't see my hands, but they're like twitching all the time.
This incredibly excited and incredibly nervous team fills my heart with so much joy because I understand that you all are here debuting your very first project. Emily, can you talk to me a little bit more about A Taste of the Past?
Yep, A Taste of the Past is a part cooking, part narrative side scroller about a young girl who finds herself on a train after her mother's passing. She has to talk to her cookie ancestors, recreate Chinese recipes that her mom thought of, and reconnect with her Chinese heritage.
All right, I think that we have a fantastic and relatively short trailer coming up. Why don't we take a few moments just to watch it?
Mom, is that you?
Well, that was a relatively emotional trailer. Emily, can you talk to me a little bit more about why the game actually takes place on a train?
Yeah, so we actually originally made this game for a game jam, and the theme was deeper and deeper. So our interpretation of that was to go deeper and deeper in time. So each part of the train houses one generation, a grandma, and then the next train car, great grandma, great great grandma, and so on forward.
Interesting. Do you feel as though it was intentional to include so many aspects of ancestors and heritage inside of every single one of the trains of the car?
Yeah, so as a Chinese American growing up, I noticed a pretty big generational divide between my parents and me. The way that we talk about family, the food that we eat, just simply how we navigate the world. And so I wanted to explore that dynamic even further in this game.
Now, speaking of that dynamic, I actually want to throw over to Julia and Caroline here, but I want to start with Julia. One of the interesting things that I noticed inside of the game was that when you do enter different cars, the actual colors of every single car is incredibly different. It is very, very much so, it seems to be replaced upon the main character's emotion. Can you talk to me about the choice with that specifically, starting with you, Julia?
So we originally created the color palette based off of inspirations of images we saw and artists we've searched into, and we wanted to maintain a similar color scheme of like blues and oranges. And as you dive deeper, or if you dive to the fantasy world and in the real world, the tones get warmer as she begins to like start accepting certain parts of her past and like becoming more happy with herself. We do want to play with that kind of positives, negatives, warmths, and colds kind of contrast.
Yeah, I definitely second what Julia said. In the beginning, when you start out the game, almost like the entire scene is almost entirely blue and it's very cold. And then as she gets into this dream state, each train becomes more like, well, deeper and deeper in time, obviously, with the theme of that game jam we originally created this game on. Jamie's not here, but they were our environment artists actually, and they created all these trains. And yeah, I think the progression of color throughout the story really resonates with how May is feeling throughout the game.
Now, I want to throw it over to Kaio here. I know that there is a lot of emotion in general in both the narrative and the actual visual aspect of it, but I want to talk a little bit more about some of the soundtrack inside of the game. How did you come up with the concept of what this game would actually sound like as you're going through it and reading and exploring more?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing that came to mind is like how the game has a very like intimate narrative, and it's a very like has an intimate core. And the first idea to come up was, why don't I do like a soundtrack with just a piano, just like a soundtrack that's just like a piano solo? Because like I feel like there's this association of the piano being such like a domestic instrument, because it's, you can't move, it just like sits there, and like people like gather around it to play. And I thought, yeah, so we can use like a piano to sort of like tie everything together. But like not just a piano, because there's this the concept of like reliving the dead. So basically for the beginning and the end, when the players are like the real world, the piano very much like sounds like a piano in the real world. But as the player guides through the journey of each card, string card, seeing like past generations of family, I added like a lot of like effects to the piano, to the point of in some cues it like doesn't really sound like a piano, to actually sort of like ethereal like aesthetic to it.
I noticed that the pitching typically at the end of the key did fluctuate. That kind of did give it a very atmospheric feeling as you progress, kind of like showcasing that you're further and further away from what you were, which was like just a small little room by yourself, and you're kind of more inside of this larger void where more and more of like it feels as though your fantasy and history is available to you. Is that kind of the emotion that you were trying to convey as you progressed inside of the game?
Yeah, totally. That's like a very that's like the detail that was like going for, having like this very like subtle like delays with like pitch modulation there to sort of like give this sense of like distance to the soundtrack. The characters like going deeper and deeper in training, as the character comes back to real life after the end of the game, the piano has like sheds away all those like layers of like delays and pitch modulations, are more very like simple, more like naturalistic tone.
Now, I also understand that this is your very first game that your studio has ever made, as I stated previously. Is that correct, Emily?
So Sondering Studio, I actually founded. It started as just a name to release all of my games on. And the games that we made were for school or just for, ran for fun. This was our first, I would say, official title.
How do you feel that this project compares to some of the past works that you've made, just for school or just because you wanted to? Like, how do you feel this is inherently different from those projects?
To me, I feel like this is the first project that's actually good. When I first started game development, I was the only girl in a room full of guys. I felt very lost. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to code. I was an English major, so an untraditional background to go into gaming, or so I thought. Of course, there's a lot of native designers out there. And it was a growing pain at first. I started making games in the pandemic. I did my first game jam in the pandemic, and for a lot of the times, I felt very lost in my life, in my personal life, but also in my creative life. Taste of the Past came at a time where I felt like everything in my life sucked. My familial life is more complicated. I was having trouble finding a job, and I just wanted to pour my entire self into a creative project. Reading the comments on the game jam version of the game was the first validation that I actually deserved to belong in this industry. Maybe I actually had some promise. Maybe my hard work had paid off. And now reading all of the comments on Steam, since the more polished version came out, has further validated that I feel like this is the place for me.
That's awesome. I kind of want to backtrack just a smidge and I want to go over to Caroline here. I understand inside of the game, you have a lot of options to obviously describe the narration of the story. You could literally do voice. You could also, in addition, like give us a random text bubble at the bottom, which is what we typically see. Inside of this game, we actually have an animated text bubble that usually is used to convey conversation and thoughts and text inside of the game. Talk to me about why that animation style was chosen inside of this game.
Yeah, so we actually decided to go with like a dialogue speech bubble above each character instead of kind of bottom subtitle kind of vibe because we wanted to, or at least I wanted to make sure that it felt like it was personally coming from each of the ancestors. Because this is a narrative-based game, it really matters who's saying what and like what they're trying to say. So we wanted to have it come from the character personally and not just at the bottom where it's a little more ambiguous unless you pay attention. And then at the end, we actually do have a bit of voice acting for the mom and the daughter because that's like kind of the climax of the game where May finally gets to talk to her mom. And that's probably the most personal moment of the game, which is why we opted for voice acting.
Julia, can you talk to me about how colors were chosen specifically for that scene in order to reinforce that bond or that disconnection between mother and daughter?
There's a specific painting within that scene where it's kind of like the daughter was the moon and then the mother was the sun, showing that case of warmth and positives and negatives. And I think that's done by our artist Jamie.
Awesome. Now, I kind of want to elaborate a little bit. Emily, I know that I've come to you multiple times talking about the relationship between mother and daughter here. It is obviously very strange. She has to literally go through her grief and her own feelings with her mother to finally be able to confront her mother in that final scene. Talk to me about the dialogue choices that you included inside of that scene in order to properly accomplish the level of empathy for the player.
Yeah, so I would say that the mother character is partly inspired by my own mother and also partly inspired by my grandmother. My mother had a pretty difficult upbringing. You know, she was a single mom for a bit. She had gone through domestic abuse in her past. And I definitely feel like that has hardened her. And in a way, I do admire her strength, but in many ways, it has also complicated our relationship with how she expresses her love for me and how we even just go about getting food, going to the mall. Like our everyday interactions are informed by her past with this. Versus my grandmother is very warm, very expressive, very forgiving. I didn't just want the mother character to come off as this like cold, heartless person. So I combined my mother's hardships and her strength with my grandmother's warmth. And I felt like that was the perfect combination for describing this tale of familial grief and loss and discovery.
And I think that really does come through inside of every single aspect of the game. At every single point while you are playing it, you do feel as though you're actively uncovering more and more and more depth to your own mother inside of the game, which is such a beautiful thing to be able to convey. I kind of want to take it a little bit less heavy and talk about how you all have been showcasing this game while you're in development. I understand that, Emily, you've actually been utilizing TikTok as a resource in order to help get the name of your game out there. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we had a studio Twitter for a while and it just wasn't gaining very much traction. And I just saw on TikTok, games were blowing up in just one TikTok. A, a social media post could get a game studio their next publisher, their next project, their funding, etc. I'd been putting it off for a year because I just thought, oh, it's so exhausting my TikTok. I don't want to be judged. But I decided, you know what, if I really want to take Sondering Studio seriously, which we do want to take the studio more seriously, we need to invest more in our social media efforts. So I started every day studying the trends, looking at the audios, watching videos about how to blow up on TikTok. And very quickly, we've actually gained a following. It's been extremely warm to see the response to our games and just the videos they make about game development. In only a couple of months, we have gotten 18,000 followers, which I'm so pleased with. I don't just talk about a taste of the past there. I talk about inclusivity in game development. my personal game development journey, game development tips for beginners, some memes that I think of for game development, just my thoughts in the industry as a whole. It's definitely been incredibly fun to interact with our community through this new way.
Are there any tips that you have for any other developers who have maybe kind of been dragging their feet on TikTok, which I'll be honest with you, I was a non-believer. And then, I went ahead and joined the church of TikTok and I got my 35,000, like it's fast, it's
Yeah.
very easy, but I know that a lot of people are scared. Can you talk to me about like what was the easiest thing or what was the hardest thing actually for you to overcome getting on that platform?
For me, when you first make TikToks, most likely they're not going to blow up. The algorithm definitely rewards you studying the trends, and it also rewards repetition of posting. I try to post 5 times a week, and I try to post 3 videos every time I post, which sounds excessive, but that really is for me how I got the following I did. It took me about a month to reach 1,000 followers. And then the second month, I gained 5,000 followers. And then in a single week, I went from 6,000 followers to 15,000 followers.
Wow.
So it really just is about gaining that momentum. The first 1,000 followers are always the hardest. It's easier to grow as you get bigger. And for me, like I remember I got a video that hit 4,000 views and I was messaging my group chats being like, oh my God, we're famous. I'm an influencer now. So now my most highly viewed video has over 450,000 views. So it's definitely a step up.
Well, I'm glad that you decided to take a taste of the future to help you with your game, A Taste of the Past. Well, everybody, that's all our time for today. We are going to go ahead and close out this interview, but I do want to thank once again Emily, Julia, Caroline, as well as Kaio from Sondering Studios for spending some time with me. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Now, everybody, as a reminder, you can pick up A Taste of the Past right now on Steam, or if you happen to be a very lucky Macintosh user, you can pick it up on their itch.io right now. We have even more game developers and even more Game Devs of Color Expo 2022 coming straight up. Stay tuned.